Thanks, Nicholas, and thank you for that incredible story as well. Our next speaker is Mike Bowers. Mike is a freelance photographer and a regular commentator on ABC Radio and host of Talking Pictures on ABC Insiders. He spent 14 years in the Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery, working for The Age, BRW, Time, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Daily Telegraph, and he covered 5 election campaigns and has accompanied numerous Prime Ministers on assignments both around Australia and overseas. He's covered conflicts in Cambodia, Kosovo, Bougainville and the Middle East. He was pictorial editor of the Sydney Morning Herald between 2001 and 2008 and chief photographer for the Herald before striking out on his own at the end of 2008. He's published 4 books: Gallipoli, Untold Stories, The Big Picture, 175 years of the Sydney Morning Herald, A Century of Pictures, 100 years of Herald photography, and a joint venture with journalist Paul Daly called Armageddon, 2 men on a faded Anzac trail. And he's going to speak today on a rather personal perspective on the need for law reform based on witnessing the progressive illness of his well-known and well-loved father, the journalist Peter Bowers.
Thanks very much. The Georgia law, Nick, this sounds a bit like the don't ask, don't tell in the military forces of the USA that they've just recently overturned. It's only in the USA, I think. Look, I'm a bit out of my depth with this esteemed panel here. My journey's a very personal one that got me to this point where I'm speaking to you today, and what I wanted to do was run you through that personal story, which will explain to you where I stand and where my support comes from. Half the problem with this debate, which is why I think these forums are so important, is that I wrote a story about Dad's illness and death just after he died, and I put it on the drum and I put it on my own blog. And I hear what you're saying, Marshall, because the forces of the right marshalled immediately, and they came in such a violent way and a personal way, and it just turned into a slinging match between those for it and those against it, and I eventually shut it down. And so I think, you know, this debate goes from 0 to you can't hear yourself in a nanosecond. So I think these forums where we can discuss this stuff is very important. My dad was a very smart man. He was definitely smarter than I was. He was stronger, and he always seemed to be one of those people that knew exactly the right things to say in any circumstance. He kind of knew how to fix everything, especially the problems I threw him at as a teenager in Canberra, who had a severe appetite for alcohol, drugs and fast cars, which is not a very good combination. A lot of those problems were not insignificant matters that he fixed for me. So the boy in me always felt that it was going to be this way, and there was a dreadful finality to it when he lost his battle with a terrible and wicked disease, and that disease was Alzheimer's. The cliches about leaving holes and what it does to your life aren't cliches when it actually happens. It leaves a big hole in your life, and there's not a day goes by when I don't think about him. This was the same disease that took my maternal grandmother. Dad had watched her slowly fade, and it affected him deeply. It took nearly 11 years between when she was diagnosed, and she probably had the disease for longer than that. I knew exactly how he felt about the prospect of dying like this. It's very close to us. The fact that my maternal grandmother's had it and the fact that my father's have it, you know, I've got to be a better than 50-50 chance myself. So these issues are very personal now to me. He said to me during a ski trip we took to the US in 2001, just after my grandmother had died, "Don't let me go like that, Mikey, bloody shoot me." He never minced words too much, my old man. Ironically, the disease would have already actually started to chip away at his brain by this stage. He had this way of saying really important things in a kind of casual and offhanded way. It was just his way, and I suspect it was a way to lessen the blow for us on important issues, kind of dipping a toe in the emotional waters, really to just you know, see how we would react. He actually never got to the point in confiding in us that he was ill. But I think he knew something was wrong. The closest I got was he said, "I'm losing my marbles, Mikey." He did, however, tell his good mate, ABC journalist Heather Hewitt in 2005 New Year's Eve party that there was something wrong in my head, Heather, and I'm not right in my head. It's going to pot. Dad was a master of understatement. The signs were all there, of course, if you were looking for them. I think our whole family was probably looking in the other direction. We really didn't want to deal with what could have been a horrid reality because we'd watched our grandmother go like it as well. Dad would struggle to find words and he'd forget how to open and run programs on his computer that he'd been using for years. He was never comfortable in a computer age, even at the best of times, because as a cadet journalist, he learned how to punch out his stories on typewriters, and I do mean punch. He had a habit of breaking keyboards in the office in Canberra. Alzheimer's was just the final hurdle that he couldn't overcome. My father was, of course, a political journalist, Peter Bowers, and he was able to coin a phrase with almost every column that he wrote. Alzheimer's is a wicked disease, and it's a particularly bitter irony for a man who could take words and bend them to his will. Alzheimer's slowly drained Dad of any ability to say anything, and in the end, he could not even recognise his wife of 55 years, my mother, Yvonne. It might be helpful at this stage, for those of you unfamiliar with my father, to see him in action. This is quite something.
Well, earlier I spoke to political journalist Peter Bowers, who is not so much retiring as just tired, after 20 years with the Sydney Morning Herald.
Peter, you picked a terrible time to leave Canberra. I mean, the Joe factor, the bandwagons rolling. Why did you go now?
Well, I took the decision really 6 months ago for health reasons, and I think in politics it's a good idea to quit while you're in front, and I think that applies as much to political writers as it does to politicians. And it is true for somebody who's written 100 times, timing is everything in politics. My timing is less than impeccable because I might be walking away for the greatest story since Quo Vadis. I mean, nobody knows how this Joe adventure or misadventure is going to turn out. Either he might make it halfway, he might make it to the top, or he might fall in a dreadful heap. The next 12 months will tell.
Almost certainly you'll start writing again, won't you?
Well, I hope so. I hope I can...
Once you get this neck fixed up, which I know is a big problem for you.
If I can brace myself to face the knife, the surgeons assure me that I'll be all right. But I keep telling them, so, that's very nice, Ken Maguire, but it's my neck, not yours.
When you come back out of retirement in, let's hope, 6 weeks' time, say, what about television? Would you like to have a go at that?
I find television a fascinating medium. I think one of the truest things I ever wrote about television is that television is the wicked witch of politics. It can turn a politician into a frog or a prince.
It might be useful for us to go back a few years, Peter, to 1983 for half a dozen words that you said on Four Corners that still stays in our mind.
You've got me worried.
Many Australians are gamblers on the race course and I suppose with the poker machines. The Labor Party will be the biggest gamble in history with their children, with their families. I don't think Australians are going to take that gamble.
You wouldn't look like a little bet on it, would you?
So that was Dad in full flight. We used to get that sort of thing at the breakfast table most mornings, so I guess it was inevitable I was going to end up in the same way. In 1999, we travelled to Gallipoli to see where his father, who was an Anzac in the 15th Battalion, had fought and done what he told Dad once was a lot of tough bayonet work. We stood at Queen's Post and Dad read aloud what he called the achingly young ages from the headstones in those battalions where his father had fought, where they never got to live a life. Dad was really slow in getting this story together, and he struggled with requests from the news desk for a news story and a breakout about the crowds and the mess they'd left behind. These were tasks that he once would have been able to dictate immediately over the phone. And I guess it was the first time that I just placed that there was really something happening to my father that I probably didn't want to admit. His reactions worried me terribly, but I was actually covering the Kosovo War at the time and the conflict unfolding there, so I pushed all these doubts to the back of my mind and got on with my career. It's very easy to ignore these things when they're that close to you. Alzheimer's is a terrible journey, and I've heard it called the long goodbye, which is a very fitting description. It's like entering a maze of false turns and dead ends. Sometimes Dad would surface from a dead end, suddenly appearing out of the maze for a few moments of clarity. Always a very passionate man about his politics, as you can see. It was a Howard election loss in 2007 that made one of those moments of clarity come to fruition. I was standing on a ladder in the Wentworth Hotel ballroom waiting for the Howards to come and give their concession speech. Dad had not used the phone in many years, so I was quite surprised to hear his voice at the other end when I answered it. "Mate," he started with this manic laugh that he always used to use when he was excited. "He bloody got it," he said. What followed was a good 5-minute rant about the qualities of both men, the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers. He was none too impressed with either of their qualities, it seemed, but he did have a bit of a soft spot for Howard, who he said loved his kids a lot, and that's got to be an all right thing. No one can be bad if they love their kids. It was certainly a value he placed a good deal of importance on. I had about 5 minutes with him at his absolute best, and it was a joy to hear him like that again, and I would actually never hear it again. I had to end the conversation abruptly as the Howards had arrived, and when I rang him back about an hour later, Dad had slipped back into the Alzheimer's funk, deep into that maze where we couldn't see him or touch him or share anything with him. It's a wicked, wicked disease, and it just teased you for a minute that the damage to his brain was not permanent. And we had to push on knowing that the end game would bring little joy for us. There were a couple of points where his blurred world would momentarily come back into focus, but nothing like election night 2007. What surprised me most, actually, was how much it scared all of his friends. With a couple of notable exceptions, in the 5 years that Dad was really struggling with the disease, other than family members, you could count on one hand who paid him a visit. I guess it was too much of a mirror on mortality for all of us. Part of my reason for writing the things I did after his death was to say, look, it scared me too, it's okay, you know. I think we have to be really honest about this stuff. Alan Ramsey, his mate, and ever fearless and uncompromising, summed it up at Dad's funeral, calling himself a coward. He said, "I just didn't want to take the time to learn about the husk of a man that Peter Bowers had become. I struggled with it as well." It was a sight of Dad with the life dripping out of him that I found tortuous and unbearable. They say that the body under intense stress prepares you for fight or flight. I always had to fight the urge to fly away and try to push it out of my thoughts. My mother put us all to shame. She took her wedding vows very seriously. She's a force of nature, my mum, at 85. She still is. She never missed a day in the 2.5 years he was in the home, or the 3 years before that when he required constant care. It was, however, the last 9 days of his life that were completely tortuous to us. Alzheimer's is known as a disease that robs people of their mental faculties. However, at the very end, it also has a physical manifestation. This is where none of these laws are going to fall across this disease, because by the time you need to administer something like this, they're not compass. Yet we knew exactly how he felt about it. The disease attacks the brainstem and it removes the ability to swallow. This is when the horror show really started. Dad basically starved and dehydrated to death. The last days were like watching a car with its lights left on, the energy just slowly drained out, but it seemed to take an absolute eternity for the faint glow to extinguish entirely. You do feel conflicted. Part of me wanted to protect the faint glow, and part of me wanted to snuff it out and end his pain. "Bloody shoot me, Mike," he kept ringing in my ears. I thought more than once about doing the pillow snuff, and no son should have to do that. I just can't see the point in watching someone you love so deeply fight and struggle for every last breath. My only comfort to myself, I told myself that he didn't know what was going on, and any feeling that he could burn through his Alzheimer's fog had probably numbed him down to the point where the morphine then took over. But he had to be turned about every hour in those last 9 days, and the screams that he screamed through his unconsciousness would say otherwise. I'm not a legislator and I'm not a lawmaker. I know there has to be safeguards. Why we couldn't just have legally increased Dad's morphine once he lost his ability to swallow, I don't know. It was never going to be anything but a horror show once this happened. Surely this is the one great human right we should all have, the ability to decide when there is no hope left, when to end the suffering. I was clear about what my father thought. We were all clear, my mother and my sister who sat with him those last 9 days, what would have been the most humane course of action. We hold these truths to be self-evident, as someone more eloquent than me put it. The largest scars on my mother I know are from those last 9 days. Dad's light went out at 8 p.m. on Sunday, June 27. He was 80 years old. He'd lived a full and wonderful life, although the last few years were terribly undignified, and he would have hated every last second. As the law stands now, we were powerless to do anything. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this, and sorry I didn't realise this was going to affect me as much as it did.